In 2012, the city of St. Louis approved a package of public subsidy that included $32 million to help put a furniture store on a piece of land. The store opened in 2015. 7 years later, that same furniture store stood in front of the Missouri State Tax Commission and argued that the building had been obsolete from the day the last coat of paint went on. The store was an IKEA. It was still open. It is open right now. You have walked through one of these. Maybe not that one, but one of them. You know the yellow bag, the arrows on the floor, the meatballs, the flat box you could not fit in your car. What you almost certainly do not know is what happened to your town when that building went up, and what happens to the money the second it leaves your hand. There are 54 IKEA stores in the United States as of the company's most recent count, and the company has said it plans to open 10 more in 2026, including its first store in Oklahoma. Every single one of those buildings was fought over. Cities bid against each other for them. Councils stayed up late arguing about them. And the argument was almost never about furniture. It was about a tax. Here is what the store looks like from the outside. From the point of view of a city council member who has been asked to approve it. A giant blue box on a highway interchange. 300,000 square feet, give or take. A parking lot the size of a small farm. A projection, prepared by consultants, of 1.5 million visitors a year and a few hundred jobs. And one number that matters more than all the others put together. Annual sales tax revenue. That is the pitch. That is always the pitch. The furniture is incidental. Take Emeryville, California. Before IKEA, the site was a steel plant. Judson Manufacturing had been fabricating steel there since 1882 and had supplied metal for both the Bay Bridge and the Golden Gate. Birmingham Steel bought the operation and shut it down for good in 1991 and moved the equipment to Seattle. What was left was contaminated ground and a city of roughly 13,000 people wondering what to do with it. IKEA bought the site in October 1997 for $14 million. To get approval, the company told local officials it expected to generate more than $1.4 million a year in sales tax, and about 300 retail jobs paying above the state minimum. The store opened on April 12, 2000. 15,000 people showed up. The 1,000-space parking lot filled before 9 in the morning, and people abandoned their cars a mile away and walked. Now hold on to one small detail, because it explains the entire mechanism. The parcel straddled a city line. Roughly 38% of it sat inside Oakland, so the two cities worked out a split of the sales tax revenue, 60% to Emeryville, 40% to Oakland. Ask yourself why that split was worth negotiating over. Nobody argued about who got the jobs. Nobody argued about who got the traffic. They argued about which side of an invisible line the cash register sat on. That is the whole thing. That is the mechanism. Let's walk it. You drive to IKEA. Statistically, you did not walk. These stores are sited on interchanges precisely because they pull from an entire metropolitan region, not a neighborhood. So you get in your car in your town, on roads your town paid to maintain, and you drive 20 or 40 miles to a different town. You go in. The floor plan is a one-way path. You enter upstairs into the showroom, which is arranged as a loop past staged rooms. Then you descend into the marketplace, then the self-serve warehouse, then the checkout. There is no aisle you can skip without deliberately hunting for a shortcut. Retail analysts have argued for years that a large share of what leaves in IKEA was never on the list when the shopper walked in. IKEA does not publish that figure, so treat it as an estimate rather than a fact. But the architecture is not an accident, and nobody at the company pretends otherwise. You spend $200. Where does it go? Hop 1. The sales tax comes off the top, and it does not follow you home. In the United States, local sales tax is collected at the point of sale. In California specifically, the Bradley-Burns Uniform Local Sales and Use Tax Law, on the books since 1955, sends a 1% local share to the jurisdiction where the transaction happens. Not where you live, not where you earn, where the register is. So if you drove in from the next county, your county funds none of its own libraries with that money. The town with the blue building does. Hop 2. Some of that tax may never reach the town's general fund at all, because in many of these deals the town promised it away in advance to get the store built. This is where the language gets deliberately boring, so let's decode it. Tax increment financing, or TIF, means the city borrows against future tax revenue from a site to pay for building that site today. A sales tax rebate means the city agrees to hand back a slice of the sales tax the store generates to whoever developed it. A pilot, or payment in lieu of taxes, means a company is excused from ordinary property tax and pays a smaller negotiated amount instead. In St. Louis, the IKEA subsidy was part of a $168 million TIF that city officials approved for the Cortex district in 2012, with $32 million tied to the store. In Fort Worth, the city council approved a development agreement that included up to $18 million in sales tax rebates to the developer of the site. In Memphis, the local Edge Board awarded IKEA a $9.5 million pilot in 2015, the first deal of its kind that board had ever given a retailer. Hold those 3 cities. We come back to all of them. Hop 3. The $200 itself. It goes to the operating company that runs the store, which in the United States is IKEA's retail arm. And here most people assume they have reached the end of the chain, because IKEA feels like one company. It is not one company. It is at minimum 2, and the split is the most interesting thing about it. Hop 4. Inca Group, headquartered in Leiden in the Netherlands, is the company that actually operates the vast majority of IKEA stores worldwide. It is not the owner of IKEA, it is a franchisee. It is one of 12, and it accounts for roughly 87% of total IKEA sales, which is why it feels like the whole company. The franchisor is a separate business called Inter IKEA Systems BV, based in Delft. It owns the IKEA concept and the IKEA brand, and every IKEA store on Earth, including every store Inca runs, pays Inter IKEA Systems a franchise fee of 3% of net sales for the right to use the name, the concept, the manuals, the layout, the meatball. 3% sounds small. Run it against a real number. IKEA reported $5.3 billion in total United States sales in its 2025 financial year, including $1.9 billion in e-commerce. 3% of that is roughly $160 million a year, leaving the American retail operation as a brand fee before anyone counts profit. Do you see what just happened to the argument in that council chamber? The city was debating a number in the low millions. The building was routing a number an order of magnitude larger somewhere else entirely. Hop 5. And this is where it stops looking like retail. Inca Group is owned by Stichting Inca Foundation, a Dutch foundation. A foundation has no shareholders, nobody can buy it, nobody inherits it, and no one can force it to pay a dividend. The Economist reported in 2006 that it was the wealthiest charitable foundation in the world. The franchisor side traces back to a separate entity, the Interogo Foundation in Liechtenstein, established in 1989, whose existence was not publicly confirmed until Swedish journalists surfaced it in 2011. So the money from a sofa bought on an interchange outside your city moves from a register, to a franchisee, to a franchisor in Delft, to structures in the Netherlands and Liechtenstein that are owned, in the ordinary sense of the word, by nobody at all. Is any of that illegal? No. And this distinction matters more than the drama. Everything described so far is legal corporate structuring, done in the open, disclosed in filings. It is a story about what the rules permit, not about anyone breaking them. There is one open question, and it deserves precise wording. In December 2017, the European Commission opened a formal state aid investigation into 2 tax rulings the Netherlands granted to Inter IKEA Systems, one in 2006 and one in 2011, concerning how a license fee was calculated and paid onward to a Luxembourg entity. The Commission extended that investigation in April 2020. A state aid case asks whether a government gave a company an unfair advantage over competitors. It is not a criminal charge. As of the most recent public record, no final decision has been published, and nothing has been established. Now come back down to the parking lot, because the local half of this story has an ending. Start with the property tax, which is the one revenue stream a city thinks it can count on, because the building cannot move. In 2022, IKEA appealed its St. Louis property assessment. The city assessor had valued the property at $75 million. IKEA wanted $23 million. Essentially the value of the bare land minus the cost of demolishing its own store. An appraiser testifying for the company said the building was functionally obsolete the day the last coat of paint was put on, and they opened for business, and argued the site would be better used for offices. The Missouri State Tax Commission set the value at $62 million, and rejected the obsolescence claim as not supported by substantial and persuasive evidence. It also noted, dryly, that nearly every major development in the city over the last few decades has been supported by a subsidy. Then there is the risk that the store never arrives. Fort Worth approved that $18 million rebate agreement, and then IKEA canceled the project entirely in 2018, along with planned stores in Nashville, Glendale, Arizona, and Cary, North Carolina, as the company shifted towards city center formats and e-commerce. To be fair to everyone involved, those rebates were performance-based. No store, no sales, no rebate. Fort Worth did not write a check for $18 million. What it lost was time, and the years in which that interchange was planned around a building that never came. And then there is Memphis, which is the whole video in one city. Memphis gave IKEA that $9.5 million pilot in 2015. In exchange, the company committed to creating 175 full-time jobs at an average wage of about $41,000. The store opened in December 2016. In 2019, after missing benchmarks on jobs and wages, IKEA voluntarily gave back 2 years of its 11-year tax agreement. By the end of 2025, it employed 127 people, at an average wage above what the agreement required. In February 2026, IKEA announced the Memphis store would close. The closing date is May 1st, 2026. A WARN notice filed with the Tennessee Department of Labor listed 114 workers. The pilot agreement was set to expire the same year. Tennessee no longer has an IKEA. So why did this spread to every metro area in America? Because the incentive is structural, and it is aimed at cities, not at shoppers. Researchers call it the fiscalization of land use. When a city's budget depends on sales tax collected at the point of sale, the rational move for that city is to zone and approve whatever produces the most taxable transactions per acre, which is retail, and to bid against its neighbors to get it. The Public Policy Institute of California has documented California cities systematically favoring retail development over housing for exactly this reason. And the regional result is the part almost nobody says out loud. A furniture store does not make a metro area buy more furniture. It relocates where the purchase is recorded. In 2011, the East-West Gateway Council of Governments, the regional planning agency for Greater St. Louis, studied decades of local development incentives and concluded they had been ineffective both at increasing regional sales tax revenue and at producing a significant increase in quality jobs, and that while incentives were positive for the municipality using them, they had negative impacts on neighboring municipalities. The tax base does not grow, it moves, and your town is on the losing side of it, unless your town is the one with the blue building. Which brings us back to the beginning. A city approved $32 million of public subsidy to put a furniture store on a piece of ground, and 7 years later the furniture store told a tax commission that the building had been worthless since the day it opened. Both of those things were legal, both were rational, they were argued by people doing their jobs. Here is the thing you will notice now, and you will not be able to stop noticing it. Next time you are in that parking lot, look at the license plates. Look at how many of those cars did not come from the town whose name is on the road sign. Every one of them drove in on somebody else's roads and left the tax on their own sofa in a city they do not live in. The building is not a furniture store. It is a machine for deciding which side of a line the money lands on. And you have been feeding it for years without ever once reading the meter.